Welcome to our new episode of the ILA Talk Show. We are in our fifth episode of season one, and we are thrilled to have all of you here. It's been quite a fantastic array of speakers that we've had over the past few months, and great discussions, great feedback. And we thank you all, for those of you who are regulars, for your support, for your encouragement, and for your feedback. Um, my name is Abhay Wadhwa. I'm your host here at the ILA studios in New York City. And today we have two fantastic speakers, accomplished professionals in their field. The first speaker is Dr. Jeffery Bruno, who's in San Francisco, California. And he is going to speak about the optic thalamic model for accelerated light psychotherapy. So those of you are going, wait, what? He's going to get into um, a description of all the terminology so that all of us with our different backgrounds can come on the same page. Yeah. And then the next speaker is from my hometown here in New York, Dr. Joshua Rosenthal, who's going to talk about the mitochondriac connect and about sleep, about circadian rhythms. So the title for today is Lighten Up and Power On, the theme for today. And just few quick housekeeping points. Each speaker is going to speak for about 30 to 40 minutes, and within which, if you have like real pressing questions, please do post it on the chat. If it's a big picture question, we will take them on towards the end of the show. After the second speaker and the Q&A with the second speaker, which is Dr. Joshua Rosenthal, we are going to do an open mic session for those of you who wish to ask questions or have a discussion, or it just may be the two speakers bouncing off each other. We're trying that differently today. We usually don't do it, so it may go an extra 10-15 minutes beyond 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hopefully, many of you will stay with us for that. So without further ado, I am thrilled to welcome the two speakers, and the first speaker, Dr. Jeffery Bruno. Please join me in a round of thunderous applause. All your mics are muted, but yeah. Welcome, Jeffery. It's wonderful to have you here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wadhwa. And I'm really appreciative to the International Light Association for inviting me on, and I'm excited to collaborate with Dr. Rosenthal as well at the end. Yes. There's very few formats we get to share. Sometimes things as esoteric as light-assisted therapy. So this is a topic that's very dear to my heart, and I hope is beneficial for everyone.
And we are very thankful to you for having spent these many decades researching and expanding this science and craft that you've been involved in, and for helping so many thousands of people around the world. So, for both of you, completely honored to have you here. Jeffery, tell us a little bit about your journey. Like, how did you get to where you are at? And then a little bit about the title of the talk today, so that everybody can, come to the same page here.
Sure. Like a lot of life adventures, there's certain fortuitous meetings and ideas. And the person who was most pivotal in introducing me to the idea of using light for healing is my friend and was a fellow graduate student at the time, Brian Brayling. And he hosted one of the first main conferences on use of light in medicine, and he also wrote the book Light Years Ahead, featuring a lot of different innovative advances in the use of light. And so because of my really trust of my friend, and who I really knew he was very authentic and very insightful in his work, when he started talking about the use of light for psychotherapy, we both were in a PhD clinical psychology program. It
Mhm.
just got my interest. And so he was really the one who brought me into the idea that light could be used to accelerate psychotherapy. And after having so many different experiences
Mhm.
with light assisted psychotherapy, and definitely under the mentorship of Dr. Stephen Vasquez with emotional transformation therapy, it began a whole process of thinking, how could this be? Because it wasn't any type of understanding I'd ever been given before or really had, that light could make this much of a difference in emotional, cognitive, psychological healing. And so that is kind of the short version of it. Um, and if
Well, thank you for sharing. Should we, I know you have a lot of information to share with us. Should we dive into that now? And
please, yes, yeah.
so we can start the slideshow, guys. Thank you.
And so I'm going to explain what an optic thalamic model is, why I think the thalamus plays such a central role in light-assisted psychotherapy. So let's go to the next slide. You know, we can only hope to capture the purity and the power of light revealed within our natural world. There's a resonance within this womb of creation that links us to our world, our nervous system, and ourself. We see this light resonance within circadian sleep rhythms connected to the sun. We see this resonance with female menstruation, ovulation patterns linked to the moon. You know, we see this resonance even in our brainwave activity that has been shaped by the countless lightning flashes echoing between the ionosphere and the Earth. And so the influences of light on our physiology, on our nervous system, on our experience of the world, on biology is so immense that, like gravity, we oftentimes are not even aware of the magnitude of the effect. But it's really no surprise that these cosmic influences, as big as the sun, have such a profound influence on every fabric of our biology and psychology. If we get the next one. You know, one of my early introductions to light pigment molecules was microalgae. And microalgae is a very fascinating story that I first got introduced to in 1982 as a potent brain food through a naturopathic physician that was training me. And similar to light, it proved to be so beneficial for such a myriad of different conditions that it really made me thinking, well, how could this be? And the deeper I went into understanding microalgae, the more I came to the conclusion that the light pigment molecules are essential nutrients, that we really need to start to think of light pigment molecules as essential nutrients. And microalgae tells this most ancient story of how about 3.5 billion years ago, these pigments, this organism was able to capture sunlight and literally produce oxygen and terraform our whole planet. But even today, we're finding that these light pigment molecules interact with physiology. So I think they interact with the mitochondria. They're being used in optic genetics now to turn on and off neurons and cells within the body. So there's this whole communication within the body of light pigment sensitive molecules that again, was part of my interest in going, wow, light is working at all levels here.
Mm.
I just wanted to give a little shout out to the people who really gave me the most mentoring in learning about light assisted therapy. I had mentioned Brian Brayling on the bottom right, who was the person who's really introduced me to this whole new world, and Dr. Stephen Vasquez, who founded Emotional Transformation Therapy and has been probably the main influence certainly the main influence in how I've integrated light-assisted psychotherapy in my work. And then Mary Bowles and her daughter, Julie. I didn't have a chance to meet Julie's mother. She died a few weeks before I went to train with them. But Julie trained me in sensory learning program, and I've used the sensory learning program, which I'll speak a little bit more at the end of the talk. And then Manahar Croak, who is a teacher of esogenic color puncture and the application of light to acupoints in the body. I've had the opportunity to get basic training with. And then Anadi Martel, the originator of the Sensora, has been very generous in sharing with me his knowledge, and then also I have a Sensora, so I've been able to integrate a Sensora. I have a whole room dedicated to light, sound, acoustic vibration, neuromodulation within my clinic, and the Sensora features very prominently within that. So these are people who really are pioneers. So the question began, seeing all these huge changes. Pain relief, rapid pain relief, accessing subconscious memories, resolving emotional issues, accessing body maps in a topographical way, healing dissociation, rapidly addressing trauma, and seeing transformations in consciousness. How could this be accounted for? In one more click, please. In the use of chromatic light, colored light, to help integrate thoughts, emotions, memories, and sensations. So I was starting to see this as a psychologist. Wow, this is a powerful method, but how could I understand it rationally? In what way might it work? Then the other big challenge was I'm kind of an eclectic therapist, so I've studied with a lot of different energy approaches, integrative approaches, and I found a wide range of tools oftentimes elicited similar results. So, tapping, energy tapping techniques, EMDR, neurofeedback. There's a picture of the sensory learning on the in that bed area. Sound therapies, use of reflected color or goggles with letting light come in at different ways, or using projected lights. All of these could create really powerful healing effects. So how was it that, in particular in EMDR, we see this, that little device that has the headsets and the tappers, in emotional, or in eye desensitization and reprocessing, eye movement desensitization reprocessing, which is a form of trauma-based psychotherapy that's really widely used, EMDR, and probably one of the more accepted sensory-based psychotherapies. It was found that we could use eye movements to help people process. We could use bilateral sound rhythms, or we could use tapping on the left-right side of the body. So kinesthetic, auditory, and visual all could be as effective for processing psychological trauma. So how could you account for these different sensory systems having a similar psychological emotional effect?
So Jeffrey, you're saying that you are actually combining many different modalities towards what you wish to achieve. Like
Correct.
EMD.
Yeah, I'm trying to practice personalized, care where aligning the methods and the tools that work best for an individual client, and sometimes combining, integrating several systems can be the most powerful.
Beautiful. So I just, I don't want to jump ahead, but maybe you're going to answer this down the way. But I'm just dying to know, how do you interact with the clients when you have these modalities that are bespoken in how they come together? But maybe you want to answer that later if you wish. And just a reminder to the audience, please feel free to put in your questions so that we keep it interactive as we go. Back to you, Jeffrey. Thank you.
Okay, I definitely will highlight 8 different points that I think are really helpful from a psychotherapy standpoint, how to integrate light into the work. Of course, any type of healing work needs to be voluntary, and in psychology, we always talk about informed consent. People have to be knowledgeable of what they're getting into so they can truly consent. And so there is some education involved. There's some introduction with kind of the weirdness of the technology initially. So sometimes I'll do playful introductions or use it for what's called positive resourcing, amplifying the positive with these tools first before we go into more intense emotions.
Okay.
And so I was a psychologist in search of a model, and as a psychologist, I felt it must lie in the brain. Now I appreciate that the brain is only one photosensitive organ of the body, but at the time, this was the picture that gave me the aha moment. This comes from Carter's book, The Human Brain Book, and I was just leafing through it. And the moment I saw this picture, something lit up inside me, because even though I had had some basic neurophysiology classes and neuroanatomy classes, the thalamus was typically considered just a sensory relay, and wasn't very much emphasized in the courses I was. So frankly, when I first looked at this picture, I saw the outer eyes and I saw what looked like inner eyes. And I said, what the heck is that? I didn't even recognize what that anatomy was. And so I just said, I need to know more about what that is, because there's something very special about those two inner eyes. And I came to learn that those are the thalamus, and they're far more than sensory relay. They live in prime real estate. They're really center in the brain. So they're as protected and as central as any part of the brain. They're the pacemaker for our brainwave activity. And though surprisingly, we could actually, there's cases where there's disorders of the brain where a person may have just a paper thin cortex, and they can still function all right, get around. So we always think of the cortex as being the premier accomplishment of human consciousness, but really we can have huge parts of our cortex removed. But if we damage the thalamus, we're dead. The thalamus is so essential to life. It's the part that connects our brain to our body, to our emotions, to our cognition, to our sensory world. And and really, even one part of the brain cannot speak to another part of the brain without going through the thalamus. It's really like a master control system connected to the rest of the brain. But it's just now, I would say in the last 10 years, being seen as increasingly essential. But what stood out about this picture for me was we can target the thalamus through vision, through light. So we can go to the very core, to the very center of our brain through the optic tract and really target that thalamus through light and vision. Next one, please. And so some of the premier researchers out of the University of Chicago are having a new view of the thalamus. They say, we're inclined to think of the thalamus as central to all cortical function. We suggest that cerebral cortex without thalamus is rather like a great church organ without an organist. Fascinating, but useless. So really, we're starting to move away from a cortical centric view of the brain to more of a subcortical view of what really underlines some of the inner workings and control mechanisms within the brain as well. There's a relationship. They're not one or the other. They're kind of both.
Right.
And so this is just kind of a simplified view of the thalamus. So we can see there'd be a visual perception, goes through the retina, goes to the thalamus, is sent back to the visual cortex, where we have a conscious visual perception, is sent up to, different parts of the cortex, maybe the fusiform gyrus for facial recognition, sent up to the frontal cortex to what kind of response. Is this a child upset, in danger? And then goes back to motor cortexes to initiate responses. So there's this whole elaborate visual pathway. But what happens if something goes wrong? So please click. We're going to go through about 3 clicks here. What happens if a person has a stroke and it knocks out the visual cortex? They are no longer conscious of visual perception. And then if they're no longer conscious of visual perception, do 2 more clicks, please. Or 1 more. Yeah. Oops. Actually, go back 1. 1 more. Oh, yeah. So they no longer have conscious. They can't even report it. And in this case, it's called something blindsidedness. And we'll go to the next slide. So in blindsidedness, it's a condition where a sufferer responds to visual stimuli without consciously perceiving it. And so they, like I say, they may have had a stroke in their visual cortex, but their eye works, their thalamus works. It's just that the conscious cortex pathways have been disrupted. But what's amazing about blindsidedness is people who are blindsided can recognize facial patterns. They can recognize colors, motion, simple shapes, emotional expressions. And they can actually walk through obstacle courses set up for them without one reporting they see anything. They'll say, if you ask them, what did you notice? Oh, nothing, I didn't see anything. Or they will respond with the emotional mirror neuron reactions with facial patterns to sadness or anger. But if you ask them what was the emotion, they'll say, I didn't see anything. So the thalamus can actually register color and a lot of things and operate the system without any conscious perception of it.
Wow.
And the other interesting thing about the thalamus is it has these maps. And so within, to the far right, B really defines these different small centers within the thalamus that relay to the prefrontal cortex or the temporal lobe, or all the different parts of the brain are located as a map within the thalamus. And so really that will be interesting to look at. We have a way that not only there's multiple maps within the system, and these maps overlap. They can be distinct but also overlapping. So color maps may actually overlap with body locational maps. And I have one hypothesis of why that may be. Let's go to the next.
Let me make sure I'm just seeking a clarification. So what you're saying is that within the thalamus, there is a map which connects obviously to the body organs, but it's represented by colors. Is that what you're saying?
Well, no. This diagram here is a schematic where the publisher is the scientists are using colors to link cortical areas of the brain to thalamic areas, locations within the thalamus. I mean, colors are so useful that oftentimes they're used as mapping for people to better understand, their world. But I do believe there are color maps as well as body maps, and oftentimes these maps overlap. So a color map may actually inform a body map, which we'll get to see a little bit more of how I think about that in a few slides.
So what you're saying is that in the thalamus, if we use this color mapping, is there any link? Maybe you're not saying that, but I'm seeking a clarification. Is there any link between, what is a well-known chakra system and the chakra colors, and that there is a part of the thalamus which connects with the ajna or the anahat or whatever the chakra be? Is there a link like that, or?
I haven't yet seen that, but I imagine there is, because actually a lot of the chakra color maps, the scheme, do seem to be anatomically connected, and we know that there is some correspondence between the chakras and the endocrine system.
Right.
So different endocrine system and chakra, but what Dr. Vasquez has found and literally duplicated thousands and thousands of times is we can use precise colors to target areas. So for instance, somebody who's reporting pain, anxiety in their heart, when we find the specific frequency of green, oftentimes that emotional distress or pain shifts
Right.
in the heart area. So we can target regions within the body based on a chakra-like schematic. But what in my mind was, how could that be? Like, why would light be? Why would color in particular, rainbow color in particular, be connected to different regions of the body? So this is kind of a working hypothesis, or a hypothesis in progress with
Right.
this.
Yeah. Mhm.
But one of the other things, we could spend a lot of time, but I don't want to get bogged down, is there are these thalamic cortical loops, and there's resonance in the brain. And because of these oscillations within the brain, it makes for more efficient connections across the brain. But when the brain is out of sync, you can see abnormal states like depression, PTSD, OCD, pain, and these are called thalamocortical dysrhythmias. So my thinking is, do we have a method here to start to heal thalamic cortical dysrhythmias, going right to the thalamus through the visual channel? Um,
Yep.
and let's do another one. And so this was just kind of an inspiration that came to me as I was thinking, well, how could possibly colors like first of all, the thought was, how can we perceive a rainbow?
Mm.
Because if we think about it, colors themselves are a frequency across a particular spectrum. And why should, one, 570 nanometers be perceived as a particular chromatic color, while 640 nanometers be perceived as a different color? Why are there such distinct bands? And the only way I could imagine that, if we had maps for these bands. But how could we have evolved maps? Well, perhaps we know that the eye evolved aquatically, that our eye developed underwater. And if we look at how water penetrates, how sunlight penetrates water, it actually creates it only goes so deep, each of the color bands. And so we actually have a kind of a topographical system where color bands help orientate creatures, I believe, in terms of what's up and what's down, and perhaps even how deep they are. So so color itself is a part of our depth perception system.
Fantastic. Mhm.
And so we share some things with our aquatic fellow kin. And then and so let's hit one more. So on the top is a chalk art drawing. So if we look at that chalk art, it looks kind of scary. We get into an alarm because, whoa, it's a big crater. But actually, that's a flat surface where a chalk artist just used different colors and perspective to create that effect. And so we can definitely know that color and shading adds depth to our experience. And I would add that it adds depth to our emotional processing as well. So here's the kind of model in a nutshell. The sensory input comes into the thalamus. There's two big routes. There's a fast reactive direct route. There's a slow and accurate indirect route. The fast and reactive direct route goes directly from the thalamus to the amygdala for a fear response. So is it a stick or is it a snake? We don't want to make errors. So oftentimes their system reacts based on past memories or just survival instincts. However, if we start to think about it and start to look at other comparisons and go through our cortex, we start to benefit from extra processing, and we can actually shift from a stress, freeze, flight, fight response to start to calm down. And we can change the experience. And so if we think that particularly past traumatic memories have been paired with sensory input, what happens if we have the person recall, bring up that memory, and then we change that by adding a new color to it? So it's called memory consolidation. And we add different components. We help them psychologically get a different perspective, maybe to breathe as they're recalling the experience, add different inputs, let them know that that memory is in the past, that they're safe now. But we're color coding that memory in a new way. And then when that memory folds up and goes back into the psyche, it has to be reprocessed because now it's tagged. It's tagged by light. It's tagged by a new sensory component. So then our nervous system starts to reprocess that old trauma, and we start to get updated experiences. So this is kind of a simplified model of how light can assist in psychotherapy. And so in the mental health arena, there's not a lot of innovation, but mainly it's talk therapy, behavior therapy, drug therapy. But we do have new things on the horizon, and these are being called neuromodulation therapy. I see light-assisted psychotherapy as a form of neuromodulation therapy. So what are some of the principles for light-assisted psychotherapy? And the remaining slides, which there's only a few, will actually touch these different areas. But when we want to change the way the neuroplasticity of the brain, what's most important is frequency, how often, the frequency of the resonance, but also the frequency of the treatment, the intensity. Is it too much? Is it too bright or not bright enough? Is it too intense or not intense enough? The duration, like how long do we treat someone? And then also the use of eye positions and eye movements are very powerful. Use of flicker rates for brain entrainment. The way that our eye and nervous system is set up, we have bilateral inputs. So things more from the right will go through both retinas to the left hemisphere and vice versa. We can actually target right or left hemisphere based on the positioning of how light enters the retina. And then also we can combine stimulation to create multicellular stimulation. And also really essentially, we need to have psychological attunement. This isn't just about, in psychotherapy, it's not just about putting a person into a box. There needs to be a human attuned relationship, and we use light as a tool, not to replace the relationship.
Fantastic.
And so let's start with that idea of psychological attunement. There's a triadic, Dr. Vasquez often talks about this triadic relationship between light, the client, and the therapist. And so as a therapist, it's actually pretty nice where we don't have the full emotional intensity of the client just directed at us. There's the phenomena called countertransference and transference where, there can be this emotional back and forth in the relationship. But when the light is where both the therapist is paying attention to the client and the light, the client is mainly paying attention to the light. It's almost a cleaner way to deal with transference because visual distortions and experiences that come up with the light are really internal to the client and less projected onto the therapist. So it's a really good way to work with transference, countertransference. But there needs to be a sense of security, trust, attunement to really make it work.
Hey, Jeffrey, there are so many good questions that are coming up from the audience. So just a quick yellow flag on the time. We're 8 minutes from our time. So I do want to leave at least 5 minutes for the questions.
Oh,
Different.
okay. I think there's like 4 slides. Sorry, I'm just trying to push through a lot of
This
information.
is
I'd be
great.
happy to talk about questions as well.
Sure.
Okay, next. Um, one person whose work has really excited me recently is Carol McMakin, and she wrote a book, The Resonance Effect. What's unique about her work is she says we need to be very specific in the frequencies we use. And she describes it like a metaphor of a car lock. You know, if you use any old electronic car lock, it's not going to unlock the car. You need to have the specific frequency to make the physiological changes. And as you can see in that one chart, visible light is actually part of the electromagnetic frequencies. So instead of just thinking of light as you know, a light bulb, you know, sometimes we get caught up in our thinking. We think, you know, I know for myself, the biggest struggle initially was, well, light, you know, that's like a light bulb, and color, that's like what you know, that's like paint. How could a light bulb and paint do profound healing? Well, we need to start to think about light quite differently. Light can actually shift microRNA. You know, light can start to shift heat shock proteins. Light can change circadian rhythms. Light can speak to the mitochondria. So light can go deep into our physiology, deep into our nervous system, but the specific frequencies can make all the difference. And the other thing is that we only need to think about this visually. There's research showing that worms, certain types of worms, can actually distinguish color, the color blue. And these are blind eyeless worms. So light can actually speak outside of conscious visual eyes. And the next one. And so if we look at, from a psychotherapy standpoint, we have something called a window of affect tolerance. And so if we have too much brightness, or certain colors will arouse and bring dormant feelings to the surface, certain colors will cool and help prevent the system from flooding. So we can adjust the type of color, we can adjust the intensity, we can adjust the flicker rate, we can adjust the eye positions to keep the client in the therapeutic sweet spot where healing, optimal healing, can occur. And we can do it for the right duration. And also the thing is that light can actually, particularly flicker rate, or light modulation, can entrain brainwave activity. So we can take a person down into theta or up into gamma simply by changing light flicker rate. The quickest way to change brainwave activity is to ask somebody to close their eyes. Within seconds of closing your eyes, there's a shift in brainwave activity, an increase in alpha. So powerful is our visual system on brainwave entrainment. Okay. And I talked about the bilateral, where we have we can access different hemispheres based on how the light or the color enters the eye, or the positioning of where we're looking. Mm-hmm. And almost done, the last slide. And here's a picture, that beautiful violet kind of picture. That's in my sensora room. And I have my client lying down and looking. There's not only this most amazing chromatic projector, but there's surround sounds. I now have kind of state-of-the-art QEEG brain mapping and neurostimulation that I can combine. So it's this inward experience, being able to take a person into a relaxed or into a really healing place very rapidly, using sensory rhythmic entrainment and particular use of colors. And so if people want to learn more about the work I do, I have a website, childwisdom.org, and I'd be happy to answer questions.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jeffrey. This is so informational. This is great. Well, we have about 4 or 5 minutes for questions, so I would dive straight into it. First, what is the difference between thalamus and hypothalamus?
Well, the hypothalamus is more of an endocrine organ. It's also directly light sensitive and involved in a number of physiological functions.
Okay.
I think Dr. Rosenthal maybe could speak a little bit more of it, but they're connected. The hypothalamus and the thalamus are definitely connected and speak to one another.
Got it. So rapid fire questions, right? So the next one is the thalamus involved in dreams and how? There is this guest says there is a strong feeling that vision and dreams go from the very center of the brain since the eyes are switched off.
Yes. Thalamus is definitely involved in dreaming. So when we dream, we oftentimes go into slower brainwave activities. And the thalamus is definitely involved in the production of these slower brainwave activities, and even sleep spindles are produced. But in terms of the REM dreaming, yes.
Okay. Next question is, are there colors he has identified that associate with healing certain events or emotions? Red, blue, yellow, question mark. Is there a Hertz frequency on this? Have you identified
With
colors that associate with healing certain events or emotions?
Yes, and that's where the attunement process is, and that's why really, there's a lot of different systems, and people who really work with colors are looking for correspondences between various emotions or body states to match the color to best support that healing process. You can combine Hertz flicker rate frequencies as well, so you can combine a color with Hertz as well to it.
Fantastic. All right. So, how do you work with children? Do you work with children?
I do work with children, and with children, they're a lot more sensitive to sensory input. They're a lot more playful and more open to working with colors, and so I like the use of applying sometimes use of color wands, where I'll have a color. This is again developed by Dr. Vasquez, where there's a particular color that you can have a child look at and engage in bilateral movement or in particular brain spotting positions. Sometimes I'll apply color to acupoints, whether it's auricular or on the wrist. And sometimes really just invite kids to draw with colors as well.
That's fantastic. There's one comment which I agree with completely, is that we need you here for 2 hours, not 45 minutes. And we hope to have you back because it's a fantastic talk. The guest says, and the last two questions. Are there efforts to work with TBI patients? I don't know what TBI.
Traumatic brain injury.
Okay.
Yes. Color. You would ask about color can be very healing for the brain. In the mitochondria, certainly it can activate brain tissue. It can be used, the sensory learning program has had really a big history of working with traumatic brain injury in autistic kids, helping to repair the brain. There are people who are using particularly multisensory approaches for working with TBIs.
Fantastic. There was a statement that how does this relate to Lucia light number 3, the Austrian manufacturers who do the flashing light?
Yeah.
Are you using those
I would say, I have experienced that system once. I'm not so familiar with it, but here's the difference. The challenge is that the way that I use light as a psychologist is for attunement. And so I need to have an adjustable system and that I can change and tune to the individual. The other part is flicker rate for a lot of people, it can bring up a lot very quickly. So you can create an altered state very rapidly and a stroboscopic state very rapidly with flickering light. But for some people, it's overwhelming and you don't want to have any flicker sometimes. So it's nice to have the option to turn on flicker or turn off flicker and to modulate flicker, in a sensitive way.
Fantastic. There's a question, are we able to review this talk later? Yes, on the ILA YouTube channel. In about 7 days from now, you will have a recording of this talk. And on that note, I should also mention that please consider becoming members of the ILA so you can support our efforts to get such prominent, pioneering, professionals like Dr. Jeffery Bruno. And we continue doing this work and expanding our connect with all of you. I do want to thank you personally as well, because I really enjoyed interacting with you, Jeffrey, and
You're
we hope
welcome.
you come back. Yes, we hope you will come back and see us. Please take some time to go through the messages because there are many, and I think there are certain comments that came in, which is
I'll try to respond to them as I can.
please do. And so thank you again, Jeffrey, and we hope to see you back sometime.
You're